This week's episode is sponsored by Pelican.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
And as always, our audio engineer, Mike Weinstein, will be inserting his 2 cents worth when topic-related spikes of enlightenment come to him.
That's 5 cents to you.
Inflation. There you go. Next year, it's going down. So, grab it while you can. Well, it's that time of year again. For the 9th year running, we are pleased to present our annual Cameras of the Year podcast, which in the name of accuracy, we've rebranded as our Photo Gear of the Year episode. Our current crop of cameras outperform their predecessors in terms of resolving power, speed, and accuracy. And if these are your priorities, most shooters should be tickled pink with this past year's offerings. Some folks are wondering why Canon still hasn't come out with a true flagship mirrorless camera yet. And if anybody has any clues, let us know. A big technical advance worth talk time is Sony's new global shutter, which we'll discuss when we get to the Sony A9 III later in the show. With controversies over AI looming large, we plan on discussing these new in-camera authenticity technologies, including Leica's content credentials technology for guarding against AI and fake imagery. Firmware updates are no doubt going to be increasingly common. The big question is, are manufacturers going to continue providing these updates free of charge, or are we going to be paying for them? We're going to ditch our usual strict adherence to discussing gear alphabetically in order to compare Fujifilm's popular Instax models against the Polaroid i2 and the Leica Sofra 2. In another camera comparison, we'll talk about monochrome-specific models of the Leica M11 and the Pentax K3 III. The big question many folks ask about these cameras is there any real true difference between the files captured by monochrome black and white only cameras and conventional RGB camera files converted to black and white post-capture? This is a topic we will absolutely be discussing during the course of this show. Last year, we pegged supply chain issues as the elephant in the room. Thank goodness that ship has since left the dock. This year, we're going to be debating the pros and cons of playing inside baseball and all those camera manufacturer rumor sites, and you know which ones I'm talking about. Truth of the matter is, when it comes to embargoed products, we here rarely get to know the real deal before you do. We're reading the same stuff. For informed insights about all of the above and to get better sense of how consumers are reacting to all of these cameras and lenses in real life, we welcome as our returning guest, Kevin Rickert, B&H Photo's senior sales trainer for photography and lighting. It's Kevin's job to keep in touch with camera and lens manufacturers and get details about all the latest releases and updates. If you appreciate the fact that our world-renowned B&H staff seemingly know everything you need to know about just about every product that we have, give Kevin a nice little thank you next time you see him in our New York City superstore. Born and raised in New York and self-described as an avid traveler, Kevin has visited more than 20 countries and counting. In the past year, he's been to Singapore, Tokyo, Prague, Munich, and Budapest, as well as the Frank Lautenberg Transit Hub in Secaucus, New Jersey. This guy gets around. Kevin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. The train wasn't delayed today, so I'm here.
What did they do wrong?
There's a bull on the tracks. True story.
You're laughing. A few days ago in Costa Rica, there was a bull on the road. But New Jersey Transit, I've seen worse on the tracks. Anyway, you're back for this is like the 17th a year in a row, I think.
Feels
right?
like that in my head. We
already gave you 3 T-shirts and 5 hats. Anyway, it's always great having you on the show. It's like you know your stuff, and it's always great talking with you. So we might as well do the usual alphabetical to start, which means that we're going to start talking about Canon. And Canon had several new cameras this year and some lenses. And the first camera is the EOS R8, which was introduced in February. What makes this camera so special?
Well, one thing, it's a very affordable 24 megapixel full frame camera. Great for content creation, really. Hybrid capture is the main thing about it. So Probably you hear that term a bunch because every manufacturer seems to be concentrating on those who are going to be creating with photo and video. Has live streaming with UVAC, which basically means you plug it into something, it acts like a webcam. That's a term that's will float around basically these days, but it's there to draw people into the EOS RF lens lineup and such like that. So it's a good injection to the whole ecosystem for people who don't want an R5, R6 Mark II, things like that.
Okay, it's really funny, but preparing for this episode and talking about all the cameras of the past year, it's amazing how many times vlogging and content creators keeps coming up. How at the angle of all of the marketing has been going, and I just have to giggle because I remember talking with some Canon reps and some senior people from Japan many years ago, going back maybe 25 years ago when digital was just starting to kick in. And they were talking then about the competition between the still camera division and the video camera division. And somebody was bold enough to say, there's going to come a point in time when these two divisions are going to merge. We're coming so close to that right now because all the cameras are doing the same thing. They're meant to be able to capture whatever it is, the media that you need at that particular moment at a flip of a switch or less than that. And I find that to be pretty fascinating, how all this stuff is sort of morphing along here. So that's the R8 that we have there. And after that, we have the R50. Now, that's a whole different camera. This is the replacement for the Rebel, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically the R50 will be your midline APS-C one, basically. You can think of it as a replacement for the Rebels. You could also think of it as a replacement for the recently sunset EOS M series. So R50, M50, just change a letter. And basically that's what you have here. So this is going to be someone who wants to do, once again, those two words, content creation. So you have your stills at 24 megapixels. You have your 4K 30 for video recording. It's a vertical movie mode, so if people want to put this on their TikToks or their Instagrams, it's the right aspect ratio for that. But basically, what you see from Canon this year is that they're trying to flesh out their APS-C lineup and also have suitable replacements for their EOS M series. As you see with the R100, basically, to talk about that quickly, that's a replacement for the M100. So the numbers kind of make sense when you look at something like that.
And so the big difference would be between the R100 and the R50. Bottom line is?
This would be image processor isn't as new on the R100. It has good video, but not up to the same standards in the R50. It doesn't have a flip out screen. So it's more on their entry level side of things.
Gotcha.
Especially at that price.
And it's funny, even with the most basic of entry, just like all of the Rebels from the very, very beginning, the viewers, whether using the EVF or the screen, they're 1 to 2.5 million dots. The resolving power is wonderful. And even 15 frames per second on an entry-level camera, to me, that's just a giggle. It's amazing what you do get for your money these days. It really, really is impressive. Now, there's another camera that's kind of interesting here that breaks away from all of these, and that's the V10, the PowerShot V10. And that's an interesting camera that I was looking at a little bit myself. Who is this aiming for compared to everything else we've just been discussing here? What would make this different from the previous cameras for creating content, for doing vlogging? Which tool would you use for what?
PowerShot is something that Canon wants to hold on to as like a brand recognition right there, because PowerShots is kind of synonymous with like point and shoot camera.
That was their brand.
Yeah,
that was their branded marketing. If we said PowerShot, you automatically knew it was Canon. Yeah. That's right.
Sure Shots, Rebels, they all had a little niche in the vernacular of a photographer or a photography store. But basically, when it comes down to the V10 and subsequently when we go to the other vlogging-centric cameras like the Sony ZV series, basically, you have to think of who these cameras are for these days. Like, there's a younger generation out there who their first camera is a smartphone, maybe. And these camera manufacturers have to think about it. It's like, all right, our market share eroded because of the smartphone. What are we going to do to kind of stave that off for another 5 years, 10 years, try to keep this? So they're thinking outside the box, making cameras that may not have a particular form factor that we're used to. So therefore, we have something like the V10, which is pretty much a quick, simple, easy way to record video of yourself or something else. It kind of reminds me of those flip USB cameras back in, was it like the mid 2000s?
Yeah, that's yes, absolutely. The same thing triggered me too. This seems like almost, hate to use the word retro, but there is kind of a retro quality about it because there were attempts to do this earlier on for sure.
Yeah, and then there was some other weird cameras that existed around that time frame. I think a lot of camera industry was, experimenting, and this is before, iPhones became like what they are now. But for the most part, you have brands trying to carve out a little of that market share. And so Canon's using the PowerShot line with the V10 to have a capable camera that does good video for 4K 60p. So you're able to do slow motion with that. Has a little flipping screen, basically. It's just made to do quick and easy captures for people who just want to be walking around and such like that in the street. But
what I also noticed, it has the equivalent of a 19 millimeter wide angle lens, which means that this device is going to have a very distinct visual signature whenever it's used, because 19 millimeter, you have to know how to use it. You have to use it right. And it definitely has a look to it other than just a standard normal or semi wide angle lens. This is going to have a very distinct look to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I also see how some full frame cameras, also some other vlogging cameras start around a 20 millimeter equivalent focal length, because we all know that, when you accidentally put on the selfie camera on your smartphone, you get scared for a quick second, like, who is this person? And it's just you, because you're too close to the screen. So everybody knows the effect of just being too close to a camera, how it distorts facial features. So typically, if someone's vlogging, they'd be at arm's length or mid-arm's length. So in order to have a better flattering look, to get the idea of the background behind you, you have to kind of go wider, thus the 19 millimeter equivalent.
Unfortunately, a lot of people never quite catch on to that concept. No, move it away from your face a little bit. You will look better. You did mention one thing that was a truism, is that many people who are coming into photography these days, their entry device for photography was not a camera, but was a smartphone. And I don't know, having been raised on regular cameras, I would say that, like, the iPhone, even though I use it tremendously and I love the pictures I get from it, ergonomically, it's the worst camera I've ever used in my life. It's a phone. Let's face it, that takes great pictures. So anything, in my opinion, beyond that little flat box is an improvement. And I'm assuming that with the way this is designed and it has that little built-in stand, it's probably a lot easier to use compared to, say, the standard smartphone. That's just my guess, not having used it.
Yeah, it still has that vertical feature, but it's more substantial and it's not as thin. So that helps. But if someone's like 18, maybe even younger, that could be a deal breaker for them, because it's just going to be familiar to them, like form factor wise. So they may not be like, oh, this is no big deal. But for people who are, maybe a little bit older, who like the feel of a camera, yeah, obviously the smartphones don't have the best ergonomics, and we know that. There's some cameras that don't have good ergonomics because they're too flat, but there's solutions for that. But at this point, yeah, you're right. It's taking photos with a phone is way different from taking pictures with a actual camera.
And also, I know there's always some kind of new device to make your smartphone look and feel more like a quote unquote real camera, except it no longer fits in your pocket and it's impossible to make a phone call with it at that point. Just one question I have. Is this the only PowerShot left? Is that name used anywhere else these days?
This is the most recent use of the name, but I think they still produce like their super zooms, like the SX 720 HS, which is
okay. So there are still a few, because it used to be like every 3 months they came out with another 40 power of these PowerShot cameras. It was hard to keep track, but now when I just saw this name come up in this list, I go, wow, I haven't seen that name for a while.
Yeah,
it's kind of fun.
It's been a while since there's been a new PowerShot. I remember working at another establishment and having every January, because it was CES, you would see like Canon, Nikon, and all these other brands come out with like 20 like point and shoot cameras. Like it was ELPH this version, ELPH that version, ELPH this version. You're just like, all right, too many cameras. What are the differences? And each came with like 12 colors. And then, yeah, those days are kind of gone. Now the smartphones come in colors.
As I say in the automotive trade, there is a seat for every butt and a butt for every seat. They say it a little differently, but that's really the truth of it. Okay. So, Kevin, before we break away from Canon, anything else you want to mention from the Canon line that stands out to you in this past year as far as cameras, lenses, or even accessories that you think is worth mentioning?
When it comes down to Canon overall this year, they basically went on a mission to fill out their lens lineup, so on, fill out that APS-C to kind of make everything under the same RF mount umbrella, because it was kind of like, I wouldn't say fractured, but it was kind of like segmented in a way. Like people had to choose between, should I get the EOS-M? And then if anybody called us up, we're like, I don't know if you should go down that route because Canon's probably going to make everything RF. And that's basically what happened this year. So they fill out the line with a bunch of good cameras for most people because it was kind of top heavy for a while now. So,
okay. We are going to switch to the next letter in the alphabet, Fujifilm. And there's different lineups we have. We have regular cameras and the Instax cameras. So let's start talking. We'll start with the XS20. What can you tell us about that?
What I like about Fujifilm is like they're very consistent on their lineup. Even though I have a lot of models, but they're very consistent that everything will give you similar image quality because you have all the X-trans sensors inside of it. So if you just put a lens on and compare it to another camera of that same generation, it'll be the same. So this is a 26 megapixel camera with a PSAM dial. If anyone has used a Fuji camera in the past, you will know they typically do a dial for shutter speed, for ISO, things like that. So this one's a more traditional program, shutter speed, aperture priority, and manual modes. So it's more traditional for someone who's coming from any other brand to just pick this camera and be like, I know what I'm doing. Because sometimes I've seen people who put a Fujifilm camera in their hands and they're just like, what are these dials? What do they mean? I don't know what I'm doing here. But basically it's a replacement for the XS10 that existed. So it has stabilization, it's a small, lightweight camera, very good for traveling.
Yeah, you do see them when people are traveling. You do see these cameras out a lot. And I've always felt that Fujifilm has been one of the most innovative camera companies for decades. Some of the products that they've come out with are always very different from everybody else's. And including the next camera in the lineup, the GFX 102 medium format. That camera changed the medium format world for many, many people because prior to this camera, medium format digital was and still remains to be a lot pricier than the smaller formats. And Fuji to put a big dent in that with a really, really nice product. So how does this new puppy come along?
The GFX 100, the second. They treat it like a king. So
they really pronounce it the second? Seriously?
Yeah, the second. I had Fujifilm in, hi Brandon, come in for a training, and he's like, this is called the second, not Mark II or II. I was like, oh, okay, like a king. So I guess they want to treat it like that. It's weird. It's weird. It's hard to say that. It's like the second. It's like has a father and a junior.
It could have been worse. They could have called it the second coming of GFX. I mean, that really would have been over the top, in my opinion. But hey, come on, But anyway, they've upped the game on this camera. This is a lot quicker, and for a medium format camera, is actually quite quick.
Yeah, that's the thing about medium format. That's one of the things that you mentioned it, how Fujifilm made medium format accessible for a lot of people. It's no longer this pie in the sky, like, oh, I have to make $300,000 a year, trust funds, things like that, have a studio in like Soho or Tribeca. But it's now more accessible. So this is your 100 megapixel camera that has phase detection on there. It also has good video aspects. I'm not sure what the amount of people who are just like, let me shoot medium format video. But Fujifilm wants to capture that. They wanted to have a dual purpose with it. So it is a hybrid camera, but it's an expensive hybrid camera by all means. But it's really good for someone who's going to be probably a BTS in a studio after they do their pictures for some magazine or photo shoot for, digitals for a model and stuff like that. So it is very, very well-rounded camera. I actually played with it. There's so many cameras that come out this year. I did play with it for a bit, and it's very impressive. It's not as big as the first, as you would say. So it's not the integrated grip, which is good. So now Fujifilm gives the option of, do you want the grip? You buy the grip separately. If you don't want the grip, you could just have a nice normal size camera. It's like the size of a DSLR, which is weird to compare cameras to DSLRs now. But yeah.
For listeners who are looking at the pathetic 8 frames per second of this camera, I mean, the least expensive entry-level DSLRs and mirrorless cameras are quicker than that. They'll do 15. And this camera is doing 8 frames per second. But I think you have to keep a perspective on this. You have to keep in mind that back in the film day, the king of medium format for motor-driven medium format would be the Hasselblad ELM. And that camera topped out, I think it was 0.8 frames per second. 0.8 frames per second. Now we're doing 8 frames per second for medium format. So even though this is a lot slower than the smaller format digital cameras, compared to the equivalent back in the film day, this is just lightning.
Given the fact that it's medium format, I mean, doesn't that mean that people are going to take more time and slow down?
One would assume that, but you know why? There are some people that look at all these numbers. Oh, 8 frames, I need more than that. Well, you don't need this camera then.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just, again, it's nice to know that you do have the speed there if you need it. Because, you know, when you're just dealing with just under 1 per second, I mean, most photographers could use a manual Hasselblad quicker than the motor-driven one. The only reason they didn't is because with the motor drive, they can keep their eye in the viewfinder in an easier way. You know, it just depends on your shooting style. But yeah, and that's part of it too. I think medium format, if you're buying a medium format, you're not buying it because you're a cowboy. You're doing it because you want to compose carefully and slow down and really get into it more.
Yeah. I think what's happened since it's made it more accessible for the masses, you have people who are coming from a full frame, let's say, hypothetically coming from a high resolution full frame camera, and they're like, you know what, I want 100 megapixels. It's actually sort of affordable for me now. And someone does like street photography or wants to street photography and you're in the studio and you do landscapes. So 8 frames per second for them is just like, yeah, this is actually what I'm used to. So I'm not actually losing anything. Or like maybe I went from 10 to 8. That's not a big hit for some people. And it also opens like action in a studio. Like if someone's doing like a dance or such like that, and you want to get that action, it helps. But sometimes people don't know what they don't have. So if someone's used to doing like still product photography in a studio, yeah, maybe they could just go with the 100S, so to speak.
Yeah, yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, it's good to see that medium format is breaking away from its slow and steady. You know, now it's a little bit quicker.
And then we have the opposite of medium format. I'm still astounded of the success of the Instax and all of the instant print cameras. I think it's a hoot. And Instax has the mini version 12, which accepts Instax mini instant film, and it's got a 60 millimeter lens with a selfie mirror, automatic exposure, automatic flash, dedicated selfie close-up shooting mode, an optical finder, and runs on a pair of AA batteries. What could you add to this one? How many frames per second?
As fast as your finger goes. You have to wait 90 seconds between shots because you have to wait for the element to develop to make sure you have to do it again. It's fun. I mean, the Instax series and everything that's spawned from the instant film cameras is, you know, it's great to see because it's just like so much of Fuji is because of the Instax cameras do so well there. And you can find film almost anywhere. People have cameras. You walk around the street, people are doing these. You go to a restaurant and you see them taped to the wall. So you know people are buying the film. So people are using them. I mean, I deal with one almost every day. My girlfriend has one. So 2, actually. I mean, I lost count. But
what colors?
One is peach and the other one is black. So
Excellent.
It's good to see that this is like the entry point for like probably film photography for some people. It makes people more deliberate because it's no longer the, oh, take a shot, smartphone, okay, we got to do it again. Shot, do it again. All right. You have to actually wait and see and actually be composed. It is technically medium format in a way because it is bigger than 35 millimeter. So yeah, it is kind of medium format. You treat it like medium format too.
So before we move on, there's another Instax, the Instax Pal.
The Little Pal. The Little Pal is an interesting piece. It's basically a digital camera without any screen in the back. It's very tiny. You can put it on a keychain. And what it does, you could send those pictures to your smartphone, or you could send them to an Instax link printer, and thus it will print out that photo like it was attached to your smartphone or such like that. So it's like a little accessory piece for the ecosystem that Fujifilm has put out with the Instax line. It's your little pal, basically.
It's in
I
a
love
pocketbook.
marketing.
Yeah, it's very tiny. It's a very interesting thing to find like the use case for that, like who is going to do this. Is to be someone who's young, who has something from Instax already. You have to really try to find the person who that's for. Maybe it's a good stocking stuffer for a tween.
There you go. Get them started early.
But the thing about it, it's spawned so much other brands. There's a brand called Mint. Lomography has also cameras that take Instax film, which is great. The other horse in the race is Polaroid. They came out with the i2 this year, which is like I wouldn't say Frankenstein, but it's a manual instant camera that takes 3 types of Polaroid film. It takes type I, the SX, and the 600 Polaroid type film. So it does all those, which when you look at it, you're paying, or it's like $600 for a instant camera, and each pack of 8 photos is $20. So you're just like, is it worth it? But for some people, it is. People found a Polaroid in their parents' basement garage and like, what is this rainbow stripe thing? And then they take it and like, oh, this is excellent. And then they get it repaired and they want something more substantial. And that's what Polaroid is trying to bank on.
One thing that's interesting about the Polaroid i2 is that it has manual controls, which means you could actually use it like a real camera. For what I'm gathering here, you could set your aperture and f-stop and shutter speeds. It's also aluminum body. It's not plastic, which makes it a little bit more rugged. And the only thing I'm questioning here, they say it has a 98 millimeter f8 lens yielding bokeh effect. Usually f8 and bokeh are like not seen in the same sentence. But I'm just curious to know exactly, how it renders itself. I'd love to see some pictures from this camera. I have not had a chance to handle one yet.
Polaroid, are you out there? But yeah, it is interesting that they went manual, because there is other ones on the Fujifilm ecosystem, like from other brands that have that capability, but they're pricey as well. But I do like how they kind of pushed the envelope a little bit with just like, we're going to have autofocus, manual control, and take the 3 types of film that Polaroid Originals, now Polaroid, has put out, aka the Possible Project. But once again, for people who are shooting on a Instax and it's $150 and you see this price, you're like, oh, that's a jump. But it's for some people who like that aesthetic, it's great. And then you have our favorite red dot in the world, Leica, has the Sofort 2, which was announced. I'm not sure if people remember the Sofort 1, but that's a little bit of a hybrid camera because it is a digital camera that basically outputs to Instax film if you would like, but it also has a memory card slot. So if you want to save that image and reprint that image that you took, you could do that as well. So is that cheating? Maybe, but it is useful for the people who, I've dealt with this. Someone takes a shot with an Instax camera, and someone's like, "Oh, I want that picture too," and then you end up having to use your smartphone to take a picture of that image, and it's kind of just like, all right, if I could just print it again. It's a very good ecosystem. If it funds more film down the road, that's great for me. I mean, I want more film.
Well, that's one of the things about digital is that all of a sudden you're not selling film and processing anymore. That was the end of the deal. That was why there was a lot of resistance early on by manufacturers to go to digital, especially like people like Kodak. To them, digital was death, and it ultimately proved that way. So that's that with instant cameras. All right, hide your credit cards. Leica had some interesting products this past year. The Q3, the third in the series of the Leica Q line. I remember when the Leica Q first came out some years ago, I was totally taken with the camera and what it was capable of doing. The size was great. The lens is amazing. My feeling is you basically are buying an outstanding Leica lens, the highest quality, 28 millimeter, 1.7 Summicron. And it happens to come with a really nice compact body attached to it for the same price. And that's really a healthy way of looking at it. The original was great. It was a 24 megapixel. Then they went up to, I believe it was 40 for the Q2. And now the new one is the 60 megapixel, which I don't know how much more resolving power the average human being needs in this kind of a format. The camera itself still has a 28 mm 1.7 spheric lens. And Kevin, tell us more about this. Oh, triple resolution technology, which is also cool. Fill us in the details.
The Q3. So this is basically for people who feel like they missed out on the Fujifilm X100V and they want something a little bit more fancy. But basically, it's one of those cameras that you look at a lot of people who, street photographers who love the Leica brand, who could afford the Leica brand. And it's packed with good technology, like you said. So 60 megapixels, which has a reason because you have like that triple resolution technology. Basically, it's called pixel binning. It groups pixels together. That it allows you to have different resolutions, but still use without cropping, basically. So that's why that camera is at 60 megapixels, which is a smart maneuver. It has also like a digital crop aspect that allows you to simulate different focal lengths on there. So if someone doesn't want 28, they want to go to 35 or such, you're allowed to do that. For a Leica, it is packed with good video features. It does 8K, 30, 4K 60. So which is interesting because typically you don't think Leica in video, but I think they're starting to realize that people want one really good device to do both. But yeah, there's a lot of great things that it has, like onboard memory, USB-C, which is my favorite thing in the world. Weather sealing, so you can take it out anywhere. The first two were great. This puts it up another level as a great, well-rounded camera for those who, who can afford it. But if someone's saving their money, there's like a milestone birthday, or they know they want to make a jump to Leica, this is a great starting point because they don't have to worry about investing in M-series lenses. It's great. And if someone wants...
And you've got, I mean, what you're getting is the optical quality everyone talks about there. And it is a spectacular lens. One of the advantages I would admit to about having a 16 megapixel sensor as opposed to the 40 from the earlier cameras that I had that camera for a while and I loved it, but I also like shooting at longer focal lengths. So 28 I love, wide angle and big on. Lately I've been more towards 50 millimeter normal. And when you crop in that far, the resolving power, while still good, I got some lovely images when cropped in that far. I wish I had a little bit more meat on the bone, and this camera gives it to you. So that when you do crop down to, say, the 15 millimeter crop lines, there's still a sizable file that you have. So that's an advantage of it. And I know, from what I understand, when you knock down the resolving power, you also gain a little bit in dynamic range. You're getting a little bit more tonality out of your files. They're not as big, and they're still huge, but you get a lot more tone going on compared to this full 60 megapixel resolution. So again, is it a pricey camera? Yes. Is it a good camera? It's an amazingly good camera that takes incredibly good photographs. And again, it's not just stuff in your head. You look at these photographs and you go, there's something a little bit different here about the way the camera renders, the way the lens resolves things. A nice package and pricey.
But not as pricey as the next camera on the list.
Oh, no. Suddenly now it becomes a bargain. Still have a few grand in your pocket? Don't go away. We have a camera for you here, too. And that's the Leica M11-P. And whenever you see -P after a Leica M camera, what that means is that they take off some of the markings on the camera, but it doesn't have a red dot. Some people they don't think it's a real Leica if it doesn't have a red dot. But for that kind of money, I want everybody within a quarter of a mile to know that I've got a camera with a red dot, okay? I'm the opposite of that. I don't want anybody to know what I got hanging around my shoulder. And this camera is perfect for that because looking head on, there's no red dot, doesn't say Leica. And I think the only place it even says Leica is on the very top plate. It's inscribed with some other small print like made in Germany and the model number. And that's it. The camera does not draw that, especially the black version. But either one of them, again, very stealth. That's really the best way of describing it. It's simple, it's stealth. It doesn't scream out at you, and if you're comfortable in your own skin and happy, this camera could be just for you.
And you think that people actually go without the red dot and be like, I don't know what camera that is. That's not a Leica.
Well, no. Well, I guess my point is that there's some people, they don't feel they're getting their money's worth unless it has a red dot. Some people will spend a lot of money just on a ratty one just so they have a camera that has the red dot on it. That
Yeah, those are
like a logo. It's ego satisfaction, but the truth of the matter is the camera doesn't need it.
There's another big distinction for this camera, and that it's one of the first cameras to have the content credentials technology.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have any details about that, Kev?
Not too many, because it's not something that regular Joe off the street or Jill off the street will come in here and be like, I need a camera that does this. But you could see, based in the past year and a half, 2 years, on why this is a path that manufacturers will go down to make sure a picture wasn't an AI-generated image, which happens more and more, and people get fooled. But basically, it's something that you'll see more brands doing it. Leica with this camera was their first one. The Sony, which we'll get into, the A9 III, has that, which makes sense because these are people, like reporters, will use these cameras, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. So people want to make sure those 1,000 words are true. And it's something that's developed by Adobe. Basically, Adobe is one of the partners, as is other manufacturers, and the idea is to make sure that the content is authentic.
This is a next generation jump from what RAW files were originally. When RAW files were first introduced in digital, it was considered like a negative. In a court of law, you could bring a negative. A photograph could be retouched. The negatives are harder to fake, so you'd bring a negative in if you had to prove the authenticity of a photograph. RAW files did that for digital. A JPEG and a TIFF and all the other, they could be altered. However, you cannot alter a RAW file. The data is what it is, so it's considered legal evidence in a court of law. And then they went and screwed that up too, because now you can change RAW files. So this is sort of a next step extension to say that, no, this is the real deal. This is what the camera captured. This has not been diddled with. Ultimately, they'll be able to diddle with these files too, I guess. But for the time being, if you have to guarantee the authenticity of a photograph and the legality of it, this is a very important move.
They could just shoot with Fujifilm Instax and then problem solved.
That's right. And write your initials and the date on it and take a picture of it. So we're going to be seeing more of this stuff from other manufacturers. And we say, so far it's been free, but at some point they might just start charging for these updates and these little features, but time will tell on that. Just to spend another second on the M11P, this camera, this costs $9,000, and it's obviously not a camera for everybody. And a lot of people say, why? And the only thing I can tell you is that if you've ever shot with a Leica film camera, and keep in mind this design, this camera, the form factor of this camera goes back to 1953, 1954. It's a long time. That's decades. And the same lenses will work on the original cameras, on the newest ones, and vice versa, like 99% of the time. Using a rangefinder is very different from anything we have today. It's a different way of working, a different way of seeing. And the beauty of what Leica does, in my opinion, is that it gives you an opportunity to work in a total analog fashion with a digital camera. The total experience of shooting analog, and at the same time you're working digitally, and you have all the benefits of that digital file. And I think that's what's impressive about it. Most of the camera is handmade, not much in the way of plastic. You got a lot of brass and alloys, so it's made to a different standard. And yeah, it's as expensive as hell. And at some point in time, if you've never shot with one, rent one, borrow one, but give it a try. You might just like it. Where are we moving to now?
Well, there's one more Leica, the 11 monochrome.
Another 11.
Yeah.
Another 11. Same camera. Also, I don't know if the monochrome has the red dot either. I think they keep it off. I have the M10 monochrome. There's no dot. That was one of my selling points. This is a pretty incredible camera. I have an M10. It's got the 40 megapixel sensor in it. Files are, in my opinion, equivalent to 4x5 Tri-X, which I used to shoot a lot of back in the day. It's not medium format. It's large format quality. The amazing thing about shooting monochrome, and we'll be talking about this because there's another monochrome camera we'll be talking about, is that when you convert from an RGB file you're breaking down 3 separate channels. So the resolving power is just so much. When you have the same size sensor, but you're only recording grayscale, it sort of triples the resolution of the sensor. And it's not an exaggeration to say that when you have a 40 megapixel sensor, say my M10, it's the equivalent of about 120 megapixel sensor in RGB converted. The look is very different. The contrast levels, the tonality is much broader. You see definitely deeper into the highlights, deeper into the shadows. A very, very different experience. And I have compared side-by-side images from that camera with a Sony A7R III, which is 42, 43 megapixel, and converted to the best of my abilities, the same picture side-by-side shot on a tripod. And yeah, there's a difference. All right. The only thing I still like about shooting with an RGB and converting is that I love what I can do in color channels by adjusting each of the channels to bring out different tones in different parts of the photograph. And you cannot do that when you shoot it single channel. That's my take on it. So is there a difference? Yeah.
Exactly. There is a difference. And it's also like, this is not the only monochrome camera that exists. The Pentax K3 monochrome, same idea, basically. Not a Leica, though. But basically, when it comes down to it, you're right. Since it doesn't have a color filter array, it captures more light because obviously having red, green, or blue filters on front of a sensor will absorb light. If you absorb light, you lose light. And also with detail. So it doesn't have to be demosaicked. If anybody knows how a RAW file works, RAW file is not an image until it gets converted. It's like a puzzle, basically, for a computer to put together. And that's what Alan's talking about with the detail that's involved with monochromes, which is great. But once again, for people who, like to shoot color, that's why we have M11P and the M11 or the Q3. Some people in photography terms see the world in black and white, and it's better for some people to see like the contrast. When I do it, sometimes I know I'm shooting in color, but I would put my camera in black and white so I could see how light falls. And even though I know that I'm going to get a color image once it does a conversion, it helps me get into the rhythm of things when I'm having like this creative block, so to speak.
But I do the same thing. I often keep my Sony in black and white mode, and I do all my composing and viewing and everything else in monochrome. And I'm shooting raw, so I'm getting the color file. But it's true. You see differently in black and white. You compose differently. You're not distracted. Colors can distract you and mislead you sometimes in what you're doing. And it gives you a different way of viewing. And if you haven't tried that, speaking to the listeners, give it a shot. Put your camera into monochrome and spend the day with it. You'll still be getting color, but look how your pictures change and how you see it. It's a very interesting process.
Yeah, and I put a little asterisk there. If you're going to do this, make sure you're shooting in RAW. If you're shooting in JPEG, it's going to come out black and white. So RAW and JPEG,
yes,
or RAW only, but RAW and JPEG won't ding you size-wise. So do it that way, please.
Have you handled this camera yet? Specifically, I'm referring to the Pentax.
Oh, the Pentax? No. It's been a problem for us, so to speak, with Pentax. There was someone in the store who really wants to get his hands on one, and he's just asking me every day, have you heard from Pentax? And he has not. So as a trainer, that's a bad thing when I'm trying to reach out to a brand there and it's crickets. Pentax, what can I say about a brand whose film cameras I love, who may or may not come out with a film camera in next year or 2 years? I don't know. We've heard mixed reports about that. They're one of the few brands who still wants to stay within SLRs and does not want to make a mirrorless camera. So it's very interesting. They've kind of scaled back in the past few years as far as their production.
Kevin, did I hear you mention that Pentax was thinking, or there's a rumor that they might come out with a film camera?
Pentax has said that they're working, it's like the film project, and it's more than a rumor. It's more just like, we are working on potentially coming out with it's checking the feasibility of making a film camera. And I've said it, I think, on this podcast before, maybe probably 3 years ago, that was like, if there's to be one brand who does this, it's going to be Pentax, because it makes sense because they didn't get in the mirrorless game. So they kind of have the headspace to do something else. But
it also seems like the zeitgeist was provided by Fujifilm's retro styling, and even a broader zeitgeist of just retro stuff in general. People just sort of being dissatisfied with the plastic modern world and looking for kind of That'll
It's tricky with Pentax because if you think about, yes, if someone says Pentax film, their brain may go to K1000, which is a tank. Because remember, who owns Pentax? It's Ricoh.
right.
So Ricoh is the one who's pulling. It's going to be their name. So what camera do they have? The GR. So is it going to be something like that, or is it going to be something in between? Who knows? I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
Because
By the way, I think keep in mind that the parent company being Ricoh. Ricoh back in the day made a lot of film cameras for other companies that were just there were a lot of them were Ricohs that were rebranded.
also they had their owns that were.
Yeah, it was a full brand,
Yeah.
but so I mean, it's not like they don't know from it, and it would be interesting to see. By the way, just before we leave the Pentax K3 monochrome, something that I think is worth mentioning, if people are thinking about, gee, should I spend $9,000 for the Leica monochrome or $2,100 for this one? A difference in working with each of these cameras is that. With the Leica monochrome, if using the rangefinder, obviously you're looking through a rangefinder, you're looking through glass, you're watching what the picture is. However, if you have an EVF put onto the camera, the accessory EVF, or using the rear screen, you're seeing everything in black and white, in monochrome. In the case of the Pentax, when you look through the viewfinder, this is a DSLR. You're looking through glass and through a mirror. You're watching the image in color.
I never thought of that before. The fact that EVFs, that you could switch them to black and white and then see the world in black and white. And then, take a black and white picture. But before that technology, before an EVF, you had to imagine this. It really is an amazing kind of oversight on my part of being able to transform the world immediately into a black and white landscape. I also appreciate looking through a black and white EVF because it abstracts the world a little bit. You get to see shapes. And Alan's point about being distracted by color is a real thing. It's funny.
It is.
So, yeah, props to the EVF overlords. I love them.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that, yes, the greatest black and white photography happened through prisms and glass, and people use their imaginations. I just think it's a great help for us non-geniuses to take good black and white pictures.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is a perfect time to take a short break for traffic and weather. And we come back, more new gear of the past year with Kevin Rickert. Stay tuned.
If you're a photographer or videographer traveling light, the 22-inch Pelican 1535 Air case can fit in the overhead. But if you need more room, the mid-size 28-inch 1595 Air accommodates a bigger camera rig. For an even larger load, the wheeled 33-inch 1615 Air will keep your checked luggage safe. Each Pelican Air model can utilize different inserts of your choice, including soft dividers, pick-and-pluck foam, or Trek Pack style dividers. Pelican Air cases are ultra-lightweight, durable, and perfect for all your photography, videography, and consumer entertainment needs. Head on over to bnh.com to find the perfect Pelican Air case for all your gear.
Okay, we are back, and we have an awful lot to talk about right here. And again, we're being joined by Kevin Rickert, who is the guy in charge of training everybody and making sure that everybody on the B&H sales staff, cameras, lenses, and everything else knows what they're talking about. That's his job. He keeps all the stories straight, make sure everybody gets the training they need. When you're in the store, you're never talking to somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. If they're on the floor, that's because they've been drilled and they know what they're talking about. Anyway, let's move on here now. One of the hot cameras of this past year is the Nikon Z8. Which also is probably one of the bee's nests of camera rumors leading up to its official announcement. We'll talk about that too. Kevin, Z8, give us the scoop.
Oh, so the Z8, basically, if the year ended 2 months ago, it probably would have been camera of the year in my book. To boil this camera down to its most distilled form, to put it simply, it is a smaller Nikon Z9. And if you go to Nikon's website, there's a nice little button that says compare the Z8 and Z9. You'll literally see the words same as Z9 many times on there because basically It's just a smaller version for the
It's
most part.
2/3 the size of the 9.
Yes.
So is it lighter too?
It's lighter.
Okay.
I think one of the key important parts is that sometimes you take something that works and you make it smaller and it just doesn't work as well anymore. It doesn't feel right in the hand. My understanding, I have not had a chance to handle this camera, unfortunately, is that it actually does feel very good in the hand, but it has all of the power of the larger camera, the 9. When you're traveling, if you travel, size and weight are becoming increasingly more important because traveling on planes is becoming more difficult. You're allowed to carry that much less. A camera that is 1/3 smaller than its predecessor means you might be able to take one extra lens with you or extra accessories. So that's where it adds up. And at the end of the day, less weight means that your shoulders and back feel better if you're going all day long taking pictures. So that's an important factor to me. As long as the camera still remains usable in my hand and still feels well functional and again, doesn't start feeling like an iPhone.
Yeah. And ergonomics is a big part of photographers. They always ask like how they feel in the hand. I think Nikon did a great job of keeping the ergonomics of their SLRs to their mirrorless lineup virtually the same. I do like the Z8. To put it simply, Nikon framed this camera. It is the D850 in mirrorless form. So you have that 45 megapixel, you have great video capability at 8.3K, 4K, all those buzzwords like ProRes RAW. But what I want to say about the Z8, when it comes down to a camera that was beat over our heads as far as people calling up, people coming to the store being like, do you have any word on the Z8? When the Z9 was announced, it was like 2021, I believe, people were just like, when's the Z8 coming out? I heard there's a rumor about the Z8. There's a Z8. I'm like, the Z9 is not even 2 months old. What's going on here? And the same thing happened with the Canon EOS R3, which came around the same time. It's like, how come this is not an R1? How come it's an R3? So when it comes down to people asking about a camera coming out, we don't get any information until the manufacturer says, hi, this is a new camera coming out. Granted, there are rumor websites and everybody knows those rumor websites and who exists and where to go to get rumors on your favorite brand. But pretty much when it comes down to it, well, not all of us read those websites. If nothing is officially announced, we don't know about it because manufacturers like to honeypot a division and basically put out a fake rumor to find out where a leak's coming from. So fake rumors exist because that's how brands kind of protect themselves. But for the most part, we really don't know until everybody else knows. And that's when we could talk about it, really, because there's things like embargo. Or
So
things
sort of
like
like an NDA kind of thing?
it's like an
Yeah.
NDA, yeah.
And at B&H Photo, we get these memos from manufacturers. Please don't talk about this product until a certain date.
My 2 cents worth as someone who did reviews for many, many years, when a new product would become a new camera or lens, especially something that's pretty major, the people who would write up the reviews and work on the videos that you see the day that things are released, all of a sudden you got all these articles coming out and you got videos and all this other stuff. We see this maybe perhaps a week beforehand, and we have to sign NDA forms. We just can't talk about it, not allowed to flash it around. And that said, it's kind of interesting to be able to compare what is actually being released to what is being talked about on the rumor sites. And I'll say that my own experience of having handled cameras and lenses before they were officially announced and comparing it to what I was reading about these very same products on the rumor mills, it is 85 to 90% accurate. But as Kevin mentioned, they also throw others out there to see who's leaking stuff. They'll put little teasers out there that are false. Or somebody will say one thing and it's automatically assumed that this person knows what the hell they're talking about, like everybody else on the internet. And I've seen that happen quite often. You have some Yahoo, sitting in his basement saying, hey, that would be a great idea. Why don't you put this in the camera? And all of a sudden everybody's saying that it has it in the camera and the camera doesn't even exist. So to back up, what you see in the rumor mills and all those sites, 85 to 90% of the time, it is actually very accurate. And don't think it all is, because again, quite often there's a lot of stuff that's just not true.
Yeah, typically the way I operate, especially when a new camera comes out, is that I pay attention to that because it's kind of part of my job to make sure the employees get the information that's right. let's say if a camera is coming out tomorrow, typically those sites will have something pretty accurate because someone had a big mouth. And typically I could get that information, distill it down so it's the bare bones. And then once it's, let's say the camera comes out at 10 a.m. tomorrow, I could use that information at 10:01, get what's true, and get a base level information to the employees. So once a customer calls and says, you have any information about this camera, they have it. Granted, things change over time and the camera's not physically here because it's on a ship or it's not actually physically made yet. But for the most part, that's how it works. So there's so many times that I deal with an employee coming up to me and says, hey, have you heard about the 5D Mark V? And I'm like, where'd you hear that? And they're like, oh, a customer thinks it's going to come out. Is it going to come out? They want to know when it's able to be sold. I'm like, until the brand announces it. The camera doesn't exist yet. We can't sell air. So it's one of those things that I constantly have to tell the employees, saying like, if you see it on a rumor site, it's probably going to come out, but we can't sell rumors. We sell cameras, and cameras physically have to be announced and marked up in a box with a UPC code to be sold to you wherever you are in the world. So it's about patience. You can kind of tell when new cameras are coming out because everybody's like, hey, when it goes around with the most popular thing, which is like an iPhone 15 comes out, everybody's like, oh, this is the new rumors for the iPhone 16. The phone was announced yesterday. And that's what happened with the Z8. The Z9 came out. Where's the Z8?
So on that note, there was also a second Nikon ZF.
Retro. I like calling this camera the camera for Nikon shooters who are jealous of Fuji film shooters. It's a good-looking camera. It's like classic Nikon film camera look. I think they went off the FM3, I think, or FM3.
Yeah, the FM series. Yeah, there's that whole FMFE series. And yeah, those are great cameras. Those are wonderful cameras. And they actually had features that were a little bit better than the flagship, like faster sync speeds and things of that sort, and faster top speeds. So there were advantages to these little guys, and they were, again, a third lighter than the big guys, the F3s, F4s, and whatever you're shooting with at the time.
Yeah, it's a classy looking camera. I do like the aesthetics that this camera brings. It's the internals of the Z6 Mark II, basically. 24 megapixels, 4K 30, does slow motion FLHD, image stabilization built inside, 5-axis, 96 megapixel high-res mode. So if someone wants higher resolution shots, typically with cameras with a stabilization system built inside of it, it just moves it 1 pixel, so it blends images together to get a higher resolution image. And aesthetically, like I said, it's a great-looking camera. It's the big brother to the ZFC. It's a popular camera here. A lot of employees gravitated towards it to have a nice personal camera. And that's the way I see people shooting these days. They have their pro camera, a Canon, a Nikon, maybe a Sony, and then they have a smaller camera to take with them if it's something like less serious. I know like Alan's personal cameras are both Leicas, so he has the money for that.
Me? No.
What?
Oh, no. I have an M10. I sold a kidney and my left arm for it, and I'm a lefty. I really wanted it. And a Sony A7R3. Okay.
Okay.
By the way, fast little comment here. All right. We're talking about all these new toys and all these great innovations and everything else. And I think it's really, really important. But if you have a camera that is 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 generations old, okay? And I use that word old in quotation marks, all right? It means it's not that old, it's just a few years old. It still takes the same quality photographs that knocked your socks off when you bought it. Now, the newer cameras might have features that maybe make it easier to use, or maybe the resolutions are, or whatever. But your camera is just as good as it was when you got it. And even though I get to play with a lot of new toys, and again, I'm like everybody else, something new comes out, ooh, I gotta have it, all right? And if you don't think that I would just love to have an M11 monochrome and a P. I can't afford it, okay? The truth of the matter is, my 5-year-old or 6-year-old Sony is still the camera I'm traveling with. I just came back from a 10-day trip with it on my own. The M10 monochrome, they're going to throw it in my grave when I'm dead, all right? Because I don't know if I could ever spring for something like that again. But the bottom line is that the camera you have is still a great camera. And if the upgrades are really necessary, if this new camera that just came out is going to make your pictures that much better or your workflow easier, then maybe get a little bit nutsy about it. But every time a new camera comes out, don't feel like you have to step off the roof because you have old junk now. You don't. Your camera's just as good. Your photographs are just as good. Use what you got. Upgrade when you can or when you have to.
Agreed. That's the advice that I sometimes tell people. I'm these people who always upgrade every year or every time a new camera comes out, every time a new phone comes out, every time a new computer comes out. Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And like, no, nothing was wrong with the other one. I just want it quicker. I'm like, was the other one ridiculously slow? Was the resolution ridiculously low? Things like that. People just want to have the latest and greatest just to say they have the latest and greatest, and they're not solving a problem. There's a lot of cameras out there that people jump to, and they're like, oh, I was shooting on a 24 megapixel camera, then they jump to like 50 megapixels and they've realized they have another problem. They solved their resolution problem if they had one, but now their computer is starting to smoke because they don't have enough memory or storage. And it's like, oops, I have to solve another problem now. Basically, people have to think about the problems that they have as far as if they should get a solution for it. If autofocus isn't quick enough and you're missing the shots, thus you're not getting that much keepers and you're running a business like wedding photography or running a studio.
That's real.
Yes.
That's real.
Exactly. Or the videos aren't good enough. It's coming out 1080p and they want 4K. That's a problem. You could actually solve that problem. But people are trying to create a problem just to justify paying for something new and exciting. So invest in a lens. I mean,
thank you. That's exactly what I was going to follow up. If the money's burning a hole in your pocket, you got to get something. Always invest in glass because that lens will be used on 2 to 3 cameras, generations. Whereas your camera you replace lenses, they don't change that much. Buy a good lens. Excellent advice.
You date your cameras, marry your lens.
Yes. Okay. That's it. That's something.
So next on our list is Panasonic, and they came out with a few different camera options this year. S5 II and the S5 IIX. What's the difference between the two?
One's completely black. That's it.
And doesn't have a red dot.
No red dot. That's a slippery slope with Panasonic.
Oh, I
when
know.
it comes down to it, the big thing with Panasonic Lumix, they were always kind of like not looked at because they didn't do phase detect autofocus. That was basically the whole, I would like to buy a Panasonic camera, but it doesn't have phase detection. It has quote unquote slow autofocus. And that turned people away from Panasonic. They knew they had to evolve and put in phase detect, which they did with the S5 II, S5 IIX. They're twin cameras. There's a little difference there, which I'll get into. And then for their Micro Four Thirds line, the G9 II also has phase detection autofocus, which is a big step for Panasonic Lumix because traditionally they stayed away from it when every other brand was on phase detect or hybrid detect autofocus. For the most part, the S5 II and S5 IIX, they're very comparable in specs. They're 24 megapixel full frame sensors. They have the same body type. The X version is basically blacked out. It's matte black. It does 6K, 4K, has a tilt screen, image stabilization inside of it. But what it comes down to with the X versus the regular version is that it has HDMI raw output for people who are doing video. It has SSD via USB-C, so you could plug in a Samsung T7 or T5 and record onto that drive. Wireless IP streaming, USB tethering to a mobile device, and wired IP streaming, which are things if someone needs that, they'll get that version. If someone's just doing photography, they will do the S5 II. If they want an all-black camera and those video features, probably the 2X. But for the most part, it's the video feature set that the X has. It's not for everybody, but someone specifically has to be like, I need wired IP streaming or I want to record to a USB SSD, basically.
Is there anything else we want to say about Panasonic?
Yeah, the G9 II, Panasonic as a brand is making this their photocentric camera. even though there's a firmware update to make it more video friendly. So they blurred the lines. I think that's how the lines are going to be for Panasonic. They're a video company that wants to do photo, which is not a bad thing. It's about focus, no pun intended, on who they want to use their system. But it's a 25 megapixel micro four thirds camera with a 100 megapixel high res mode, if I'm not mistaken on that. Has image stabilization, dual memory card slots. Once again, it's photocentric, but this is Panasonic, so video will sneak in there some way, shape, or form. Which, once again, if you don't want to use the video features on the camera, then just don't press the red button. But we know that in 2023, 2024, can't avoid video. It's everywhere.
Well, again, even Leica M cameras do video right now. And like for the longest time, people said, it's Leica, you're not shooting video with it. No, you got to put it in there because somebody wants to shoot video with their Leica M camera for whatever reason. Sony
has all sorts of stuff to talk about.
Lots of toys here to talk about, yes.
We should start with the small stuff and like do a crescendo up.
Yeah. Build up. Ooh, yeah, baby. Okay. So let's start off with the A7 CR. Is that going to be our first puppy here?
At the same time, we could talk about the C2 because they're similar.
Yeah.
It's easy to convey them as the A7CR is an A7R5 in a compact body, the letter C. And the A7C2 is an A7IV in a compact body. But the difference is that the A7C2 versus the A7IV it has the AI autofocus, which the A7IV does not. So it has better autofocus than the camera that it basically is. It's weird that they did that, but it's how Sony has the parts for it, so they can do that.
So let me ask you a question now, if I may. It says it's AI autofocus?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means that it is intelligent enough to recognize where someone's eye is going to be if they're not facing you and they turn around, so it could lock and track the eye. It could recognize a dog, know where the eye is, a bird, a plane, Superman.
Marty Feldman?
Marty Feldman.
That's the test.
It could track what it needs to track because it knows what it needs to look out for and understand how things will move. Therefore, it'll be more keepers with the autofocus. So it's intelligent. It's not the first camera to do it, but it's something that's more prevalent. It's like neural engine is another word that some brands, machine learning, things like that. But what bothers me about Sony is that they kind of diluted A7 meaning. And I've mentioned this, if anybody from Sony will listen to this, please rename this line of cameras because it's not an A7. It looks different from an A7. It's smaller. Call it an A5. 5 is a smaller number than 7. It makes sense. So instead of saying A7C2, A7CR, you could just say A5R, A5S. And I could know, a salesperson could know, a customer will know, it's just a smaller version of that current Sony 7 model. And it makes sense. The lineups are different and they look different. Other brands kind of get this right. Not all the brands, but you can't just throw a bunch of letters at the end of something because it makes everybody confusing. Just like what happened with the EOS R5. People come up and they say, hey, I bought the R5. I have to say, Canon or the Sony? Like, oh, I'm sorry. That's why I said you should name cameras like cars. But for the most part, I think this is a good opportunity for Sony. Just rename this because I knew what the difference between an A6000 series Sony camera and an A5000 series was. One had the viewfinder, one did not. So please, Sony, make it easy for us to discern the lines because it's not an A7. It's something different. It's a 7C, but make it a 5. Please. But on that note, yeah, these two cameras are great for people who don't want that full size, so it can fit more in their bag.
Just out of curiosity, having not handled either of these two cameras, do they have less sharp edges than the full-size A7 cameras? Because if I have a gripe about Sony, aside from the menus, it seems to be like pointy edges. something's always poking into my hand somewhere, no matter how I'm holding the camera. That's just something I've noticed. Is it the same way here, or nothing that you're quite aware of?
The ergonomics of the Sony don't bother me. It's very similar to the prior models. They're sleek, but they did change the grip, if I'm not mistaken, from what I remember from touching them on those cameras, and also on the A6700, they did change the grip on that. But Sony and ergonomics, I know for some people don't play well. People always complain about it, but for me, it's nothing that I felt was inherently like, oh no, this is terrible. If anybody has handled an A7C or an A6000 series in that same vein of design.
Okay, got it. Okay. What about this ZFE1?
Yeah. As we mentioned before, like with the V10, brands are trying to stave off all the smartphone users, and they want smartphone users to go to an ecosystem. And the ZV series, which I think I mentioned last year, stands for Gen Z Vlogger. So ZV.
Okay.
So the ZV-E1 takes the heart of the A7S III and puts it in a content creator's form factor. So flippy screen, face recognition, product showcase of someone's doing unboxings of their new favorite camera. This is made for, if anybody knows the A7S III or the FX3, it's the same idea, same capabilities, but designed for content creators.
Gotcha.
And thus, in that point, you have the ZV-1, 2, which is pain to say. Same idea. 1-inch sensor, not unlike the V10 from Canon, but this is more traditional form. It's a point-and-shoot camera for the vloggers and content creators. So once again, it is in that ecosystem of someone who's coming from a smartphone and wants something more substantial.
Okay. All right. Boy, something for everybody. It's dazzling. Before we come to the main course, one more appetizer we got going on here. The A6700, which is, again, we just mentioned briefly the A6000 series. This is the latest of that particular series, which has been around for what? I don't know, 6-7 years at least, maybe even 8 years, this camera series. And they were great initially, and they just keep improving. And what's the big deal with the A6700?
They went up in number. It just,
Yeah.
It had a 66, but it was a camera that was due, and not that we knew it was coming. It was more of that Sony showed their hand when it came out with the FX30, and it was a 26 megapixel APS-C cinema FX camera. So everyone was like, does this mean there's going to be a new A6000 series camera? And yes, it came out. Like I mentioned, it had a little bit different ergonomics, and the menu's a little bit different. But it's just because it's been a while since I handled an A6000 series camera. So I mentioned it was an APS-C 26 megapixel camera, does 4K 120, full HD 240, so you have your slow motion there, has your image stabilization, the newer autofocus bells and whistles. But it was something that was due for a while, because if a lot of APS-C Sony users were kind of left in the lurch, like, when are they going to update this series? And finally, they did it.
By the way, Kevin, is that the impetus for Sony to come out with something like this? Their existing APS-C user base, or new people coming in to the A6000? I mean, it feels like a little bit like it's lost its luster in the light of all this full frame glory. And I'm a Micro Four Thirds user, so I mean, imagine me. But when I saw, and even when I saw the body, I was like, oh, this looks almost exactly like the camera. I think I had one. I had like a early
NEX.
Oh, the NEX 5
yeah.
and 7. It looks basically like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, but anyway, who's buying this? Or are they appeasing their existing customer base to make sure they don't go away?
I feel that with Sony and the A6700, they're appeasing the people who have stuck by the APS-C lineup. Because it's not, granted, yeah, you're right. The full frame line that's taking everything. That's where everybody wants to go. And if someone's new to the whole thing and want to be a content creator, they're probably going to go with a ZV E10 or something like that. Or stay with their smartphones, such like that. But when it comes down to it, they still need to compete in the APS-C space, because Fujifilm is putting out APS-C cameras and medium format cameras, Canon's finally getting their footing with theirs. Nikon's kind of slow with theirs right now, but Sony needs to have those people who have been sitting on their A6100, their 6500, 6600.
I think it's the ergonomics, the physical camera speaks to the thinking behind it, which is, you know what? We're not going to design a whole new thing here. We're not going to rewrite the whole book. We have this new technology. We're going to throw it in. And here's like a skunkworks project, guys. Just like update the thing and make it so that the people don't go away. You know, it feels like it feels like a half. I mean, like actually the specs are pretty dope.
Yeah.
But like it's still, you know, it's that same L-shaped kind of thing. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite of what they should have done with the A7C series. Like they could have came out with one that's more of a smaller DSLR shape, like a smaller A7 body, and call it A7000. I don't know, Sony, what do you think about that? But it does feel like this is kind of just like we came out with an APS-C FX30 and we should put it into just a mainline photo-centric camera, but keep the specs the same because those people have been waiting for a while. So it does feel like we should do this because we kind of don't want those people to go to Fujifilm. They did it because they could.
Yeah. The Sony, they could do anything.
Well, should we move on to the main course, as Alan?
Yeah, this is it. Okay, got your bibs on? The Sony A9 Model 3, which was announced in November. Global shutter. That's really a big deal here. The whole camera is pretty impressive. And I'm just going to let you take it because you've been trained in this thing. You got the lowdown more than any of us here. So let's hear what you have to say, Kev.
It's a step forward. I think this is one of the watershed moments. If you know how sensors work, which some people do not know, it scans line by line. So it goes top to bottom. And as a baseball fan, I will explain it like this. It's like the wave, okay? So
I thought you were going with the innings or something.
No.
But okay, the wave, perfect. Perfect. And great. Love it.
So it's like the wave. It starts at one spot and goes around, in this case, top to bottom, and scans. And when something really fast has moved from the start of capture to the end of the capture, it may look skewed. Example is if you're in a car and you're on the side of the highway and you're taking a photo and the signs look like they're tilting, that's part of the rolling shutter. It's not quick enough. Camera brands, especially Sony, since they put out a lot of sensors and they have the technology, they develop stack sensors, which exist on the A9 series prior to this one. They exist on the Alpha 1, cameras like that. Basically, the memory is on board with the sensor, so it's quicker readouts, so you can kind of negate rolling shutter, but you don't eliminate it. You just have a really fast sensor in the milliseconds, like low milliseconds. The moonshot is the global shutter, which means this is like a standing ovation. Everybody gets up at the same time at the baseball game.
Bravo! That was an analogy for the
ages.
Yeah. I like baseball. So every pixel is read at the same exact time. Therefore, it is very quick. The benefits for the end user: there's no rolling shutter. Could capture very quick action. When it comes down to shooting in bad lighting, like fluorescent lights that are in this room right now, in offices, at subway stations in New York City and probably elsewhere in the world, you have flicker. This eliminates flicker. This also allows you to shoot at virtually any shutter speed with flash. There's no sync speed. You could go to 1/80,000th of a second, which is a weird number to say. It's one of those technologies that will have to, it's expensive technology, and that's why this camera has it for a good reason.
But here's the thing, though, and I just learned this today because I'm not up to any of the stuff. The Nikon Z8 doesn't have a mechanical shutter.
Neither does the Z9, yeah.
Because of the readout speeds.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It mitigated that rolling effect.
Mm-hmm.
So as groundbreaking as a global shutter is, a year ago, there was a top manufacturer who released a big camera and said, we don't need a mechanical shutter anymore. Our readout speeds are fast enough. We don't have a global shutter, technically, quote unquote, but we have an extremely fast compute system here, so we don't need it. So when you put that in perspective, what does a global shutter bring to bear above the Z8 speed?
You do get 120 frames per second, full resolution. You don't have any issues with video as far as it captures everything. You'll still, the issue with the full electronic sensors like the Z8, Z9, Sigma FP, but you'll still run into issues which you get artifacting and banding, and you still don't eliminate a rolling shutter. It still has a rolling shutter. It's just very, very, you have to hit.
It's very unlikely.
It still rolls. There's no.
It still rolls, but I mean, like, if you release a professional camera that's thousands of dollars and say, no mechanical shutter in here, it's all electronic, you're pretty assured that this is going to be an infinitesimal problem. And that's where I'm like, so what did we gain here? Maybe there's other things, there's other aspects. There's flash sync.
Flash sync is one thing, yes.
That's another big thing that I think people don't think about.
It eliminates the idea of a high-speed sync.
Right.
Which is you lose power when you use that. You do have a banding issue. You do have things that are very, very just high speed. Like if I gave
there are edge cases where
that's why
you can't use any other camera but
that's why it's a hard. I wouldn't say hard thing. I just had a meeting about this camera today. Like what problems? This goes about problem solving. Mm-hmm. What problems does it solve? There's people in the video world that wants this. This is a thing that people in video would always say, we don't want any rolling shutter, anything. Because in the realm of video, CCD sensors were global. Then we moved away from that because of the CCDs were expensive, noise, things like that. We went to CMOS. CMOS was better, but it rolled. Then we got quicker and quicker and quicker with stack sensors. So this was a thing in which people will create their own problem to solve it with this camera. This camera isn't for everybody. And I talked about this earlier today in a separate meeting was like, what about the wedding photographer? The wedding photographer may not need this because in the weddings I go to, they set up a bunch of speed lights or Godox flashes and everything's TTL. Do they know they're going to reach this problem? May not. You have people who are shooting golf events. They may have noticed it. Maybe they're not. People who are doing high-end sports photography, Formula One racing, probably there's a need for that. People photographing airplanes probably have noticed it. But that's not everybody. And I think Sony, what they
turtle photographers.
Turtles,
right? Snails and turtle
races.
Clouds.
Well, let me give you an example. You said aerial photography, aircraft. Mm-hmm. Photographing a prop plane, there's an issue. Jets, you wouldn't see a difference.
No, but you will still have some.
You may not on the Z8 because the fact that they excised a mechanical shutter from their flagship camera speaks to their confidence that they had that we don't quite need a global shutter. We're fast enough. But, I'm just trying to dice out the details, and it sounds like we're on the same page.
Yeah, it's like if the Alpha 1 could have had no mechanical shutter too, but they wanted to keep with the flash sync. But going forward, is this the way that brands will go? Maybe. Because once again, a global shutter is expensive to produce.
It has to be justifiable. Yeah.
Yes.
I know. I once photographed a twin prop plane, and I got around that. I just had them build propellers that bent in the opposite direction of the warp, and it was a wash at the end of the day. So it was fine. There's ways of getting around. You have to spend all the money for the camera. Just
build a new plane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's like with this camera, it's people asked, why don't they put this in an A1 II? And I know how people think. That camera is 50 megapixels. If it would go down to 24 megapixels, you would have outrage. People are like, why did you reduce the megapixels on this camera? I paid X amount of money for 50 megapixels and now it went down to 24. So the A9 series as a whole was always 24 megapixels, and it's easier to produce a global shutter sensor with 24 megapixels. And then you worry about scaling it up once you have confidence in mass producing this. Because as you notice, this camera is not officially out yet. This camera won't be out until quote-unquote spring. Could be around February, could be March. But this is a rare camera from Sony in which they announced it months in advance. And probably that's because it's an Olympic year.
Yeah.
That's most likely the reason. That would make
Yeah.
sense.
It
Sure.
makes sense to me, and it makes sense to other people. Some people may not see it that way.
And thinking about that, my sense is that a lot of the really high-end Olympic type sport shooters tend towards Canon.
Yeah.
So Sony could be making a very strategic angle.
There's always strategy involved. It's like
All
checkers.
three manufacturers. Like Nikon is jumping as much as they can with whatever they have. It's very high
Right.
visibility there.
Yeah,
You know,
'cause-
and it's getting harder to stand out. It used to be that you looked out at the photographers and you could see who shot Canon because all their lenses were that putty color, and
Exactly.
Nikon was all black. But that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So now it's just hard to stand out.
yeah, it's a maneuver. You could tell, and maybe that's why people think that cameras are going to be like, I suddenly came out with this camera. Canon's going to make one that's also global shutter, but we know how long it takes to develop a camera. It's not just like, you can't turn on a dime. That's a lot of R&D thrown out. This isn't like Kickstarter.
And then Sony is the company that makes the sensors. They might be holding some hot IP
Yeah,
and not wanting to share that.
until they make their money off of it. So that's another thing I thought of today. If Sony has such market share with sensors, they could hold on to this until the end of time, basically, and be like, all right, now we could give it away. Or another brand could go and be like, we'll pay you X amount of money to help us out with this. And Sony would be like, talk to our semiconductor division and we'll cut a check or something like that. But who knows? Because this technology is out to solve some problems, not every single problem. It's not going to help you with, granted, it autofocus excellently because it can read out so much quicker. But is it going to, if you're out of focus in a shot because you're out of focus, is it going to fix that? No. Is it make your post-production easier? No. Because you still have to do that. It's still work on the back end. This will fix some problems, but not every problem. But flash sync, less banding, less flicker issues. Yes, those are solved with this. 120 frames per second. You would ask, like, why would you need that? But some people do. It has a pre-capture mode built into it, so it could take photos before you need to take a photo. So if you miss a shot by a split second, it's probably captured. But I'll tell you what, if you're shooting 120 frames per second, you will need a lot of memory.
Very true. Kevin, as always, you're a powerhouse of information. It's great sharing this stuff with you, and look forward to having you back again to talk about the new toys that will be coming in the next 12 months.
Look forward to it.
And safe travel. Any interesting trips coming up in the near future?
Yes, I have to go. Friends are getting married in Thailand, so I'll be going to Thailand with my girlfriend. And then, obviously, since I'm going that direction anyway, I'll stop in my favorite place, Japan. So, yeah. So that's where I'm headed to next.
That's great. You know what? We might want to do a show with you just on your travels and stuff like that. You get to play with toys and you get to travel. So, there's a good show in there somewhere. So we're going to have to talk about that, okay?
Yeah. I've done a training with my team about how I approach travel. It's a fun topic for me. So, yes, I would love to.
I think we have something to
Sounds
talk
like
about
a
there.
plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay tuned, folks. We're definitely doing that one. That's going to be a fun show. And again, Kev, thanks again. Always a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having me.
And if you're a fan of the show, but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Bjorn Peterson, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for tuning in today, and happy holidays.
Thanks to Pelican for sponsoring this week's episode.